What's up, grinders? So today I'm going to be talking about how to learn Chinese characters. I've been asked about this several times on my channel and I figured, you know what, now's the moment I'm going to do it. So first up, I just want to say that learning characters is it's a mammoth task in itself. It's almost akin to learning a language. There is no simple method for doing this, and I've pretty much tried every method out there. So any video that's telling you can learn thousands of characters in a week, basically the entire character set in a month, is just selling you bullshit, basically. It's not possible. You will be at this for pretty much as long as you're at learning the language itself. So I recommend that you learn the characters as you learn the language itself, because the two are interconnected and they will help with remembering each other. So the sounds with the characters and the characters with the sounds, it's all interlinked, and it's a lot better if you do it at the same time. If you already speak the spoken language, then learning the characters will be maybe a bit faster than if you didn't learn it beforehand with the spoken language. However, if you try to learn the characters before you do the spoken language, that's also a bad idea. So you kind of want to do it as you're doing the language itself. Now I've got all that out of the way, how do we actually break down this insanely big task? Well, first up, you need to select your primary character set. So there's two character sets out there. You've got the simplified Chinese and then you've got the traditional Chinese. Simplified's used in mainland, traditional's used in Taiwan and a few other places. Which one you choose doesn't mean that you can completely ignore the other. So for example, let's say I'm only interested in simplified Chinese. In that case, I'm still going to need to learn the basics of traditional Chinese, because here in mainland China, you still need to read restaurant menus, restaurant names, traditional locations of names, pretty much any historic site. They all use the traditional characters, so you can't just completely ignore them, otherwise you will be at a loss. You need to learn the basics of them. And it's the same in Taiwan. Yes, everyone uses traditional there, but they get so much media coming in from China that you still also need to know the basics of the simplified system. So you will pick a primary character set, you'll learn that, but you'll also learn the basics of the other one. There's just no getting around it in any realistic world that we live within. So now the next question is, how many characters do you actually need? Now if you look at this lovely article here I've got from the BBC, they're telling you that there's about 50,000 characters, 20,000 are in use, and an educated person knows about 8,000. But you, good man, you only need to learn 2,000 to 3,000, which is complete and utter bullshit. 2,000 to 3,000 will not allow you to read a newspaper. Okay, I'm going to tell you that right now. I know about 2.5k. There's no way in hell I can read a newspaper. So let's go look at someone who actually knows what they're on about. So here we have an article, and in this article, they're saying that they've done a scan of pretty much like novels, newspapers, all this type of stuff. I think they did like a big scan of the Harry Potter books, which are basically children's books. And they're saying right here that according to this frequency list, you'll need to know at least 4,400 characters, but that's only going to get you like 96 to 97% of the way, which means you're still going to need to learn at least 20 new characters per page. So a realistic number, if you want to read the language fluently without too many issues, would be about 6,000 characters. Now it's saying here that an educated person knows about 8,000 characters. I think this is also an underestimate. You're probably looking at about 10,000 characters for a university educated person who knows a little bit about their own history. I would say you're going to want to aim for about 6,000 characters. Now that's a massive task. So how do we approach this in a realistic manner? Well, the first thing you want to do is learn the radicals. So radicals are basically parts of a Chinese character, and they have a specific meaning. And there is hundreds of radicals, but don't go out and try to learn all the hundreds of radicals, because some of them only appear 3 or 4 times within that 6,000 characters. So you only need the most common ones. And right here, I picked out an article which seems to cover the most common ones. So this is the basic common Chinese radicals. As you can see, all up there's about 35. I probably know somewhere like 50 to 100 of these Chinese radicals, but this is a very good starting point, and it covers all the most common ones. These ones 100% without doubt you will need to know. And you'll see right here they've got the simplified and the traditional, because often the difference between a traditional character and a simplified character is simply that the radical has been swapped out for the traditional radical. So as long as you can recognize the differences between radicals, you pick up a ton of the opposing character set just by being able to spot that alone. So these ones here, as you can see, they're very simple to learn, and most of them are actually pictographic. They look like what they represent. So this kind of looks like a person walking. This looks like a fire burning. This looks like the sun, or this looks like the moon. So these will be quite easy to learn, and without a doubt, you'll want to learn all of these before you pretty much do anything else. And you'll kind of want to also learn their pronunciation, because their pronunciation will come into play later on. Now, once you've got all of these, you'll start to notice as you learn more and more characters that they usually sit within specific positions of a character. Like this one will always be on the left. This will always be on the left. This can kind of be anywhere. This will always be along the bottom. Again, kind of anywhere. anywhere. This one here will always be along the left type of thing, always along the left and along the left. These two right here, this one's always along the top. So you'll start to notice these things as you go along. Don't try and memorize that. You'll just kind of pick it up. Okay, next up, not every character within the language is actually pictographic. In fact, I think it's like less than 10% are pictographic. However, even though it's less than 10%, or it might even be like 3 or 4%, I can't remember. Even though it's less than that, they are the most common characters. So you're going to get the most mileage from learning pictographic characters. Pictographic characters are not the same as radicals, although some radicals act as pictographic characters. Like this one here, which means woman, can be a character by itself. But this one here, which is a radical, meaning water, will never be a character by itself. So you're going to get some advantages via learning these, and then you'll notice that they also work in a standalone manner. So an example of pictographic characters that's not in that list is if I come to this article here, often pictographic characters can also be radicals. Like, for example, even this one here, which is like, okay, so you've got this here represents a tree, which becomes a tree, like means tree or wood. And then when you add it to two together, so it's acting as a radical pair basically, it then means woods. But it also looks like the woods, and then you add 3 together and you got a forest, because what's big woods? It's a forest. However, even then, it can then act as a radical. But you don't need to learn that as a specific radical, just learn the basic one. Then when you learn it as a group of 3, you'll notice that it's also being used as a radical in some places. But again, you'll kind of just want to learn these as you go. But there is other types of characters. Now, if we have a look here, here's an article I've got on the different types of characters. I think they start with the pictographics. Yes, they do. Then they go into the photosemantic characters. So these are characters that have a radical portion and then a sound portion. So for example, you'll see here on the left, they've got all these different radicals. So the first one means man, then we've got insect, then we've got like takes a step, then you got fire, tree, etc., etc. And then in the middle, they've got one specific character, which means sheep, or it's pronounced young. And you'll notice that these ones work together. So one part acts as the sound, which is the young, and the other part acts as the meaning. So you've got the person with the sound. So this here is obviously a character that's related to people in some way, but it has a sound that's usually related to young, but maybe the pronunciation does sometimes change, because you've got to remember these phonetic components have been developed over like thousands of years, and obviously the spoken language has changed, so it's kind of more of a hint as opposed to this is the specific sound. But it is something to be aware of, and you'll start to notice these very, very quickly as you pick up more and more characters. They've got other types, these simplified ones. Simple ideograms. I personally just chuck these as like, they're basically pictographic. So, like, for example, this one means up, and it's literally like you got something that's pointing up, and then you got one that's pointing down. This means down. Now, if you want to group it as like ideograms or as pictograms, it really doesn't matter to me. It's more like a technical terminology. But again, these are visual characters. You can kind of pick these up as you go. Then you've got the compound characters, which you'll kind of pick up these as you go via like looking at the parts that go together, and sometimes one part's phonetic, sometimes it's not. Once you learn the radicals and you learn the pictographic ones, you'll notice that pretty much every other character is made up of those characters. And basically, you're just slotting them together, and then maybe one of them will be sound-based, or maybe none of them are sound-based. And sometimes they're just a complete jumble of all of them, and in no way relates to the modern meaning of the character. But that's basically what you've got to do. You've got to learn those basic parts. Now, if you want to break down the characters you're not too sure about what you're seeing, a great website for doing this is Wiktionary. So you can look up any character in here, and you can see like what it's built from. So if I have a look at this one here, which is part of coffee, you can see it's actually got a phonetic component, ja, which means to add, and then kol, which means mouth. Notice here, ja means to add, but when it comes together, it becomes ka. So it's like, it actually doesn't sound like the original one, but there's a hint of it there to kind of help you as you go. Now, this brings me into the last part. Should you try and learn every single character by itself? And I will say, apart from the radicals and those pictographic ones, no. You want to learn characters pretty much in context, exactly like how you would learn words. And the reason being is because there's tons of characters which are literally used only in one word, but that word might be super common. So for example, if we go back to this one right here, cafe, which means coffee, you will only ever see these two characters pretty much in words related to coffee. They will not exist anywhere else. coffee or coffee colored. That's literally where you're going to see them only. So if you're sitting there and you're learning just this one character on the left, ka, and you're repeating it and you look up its meaning, it doesn't really have a meaning because it only exists as a combination within this word. So when you're learning words, specifically animal words, food words, they're going to almost always be two characters that exist almost exclusively in that word, and often they both mean the exact same thing. We're going to use butterfly as an example. Hu die. So you see it's got two characters in it. If I now break it apart, the first one, hu, means butterfly, and the second one by itself, die, also means butterfly. So there's no point learning those as individual characters. Just learn it as a group, learn to recognize it as a group, learn to recognize it in context, and you'll be fine. You'll waste a massive amount of energy if you're trying to learn each character by itself as butterfly, and then later on you're going to put it together, and then you're going to realize it pretty much only exists within these words. Now maybe those characters exist with other words. I can't think of any specifically right now, but that's like a good example. And usually if it does exist in other words, it's going to be specifically related to just butterflies. So it's like, it's kind of pointless learning just those characters by themselves. Okay, so when it comes to actually learning characters, what I always recommend is it's the same as when you're learning words. So what you want to do is you want to put it in a full sentence context, create multiple sentences where this character exists, and just drill reading these sentences. Because eventually your brain's just going to recognize the shape, like the general shape of them, and then you'll be fine. Don't need to go down and actually learn how to write out every single stroke unless that's something you want to do, and you don't need to learn the individual characters unless it's something you really need to do. It's going to be hard choosing when you should learn individual characters and when you should learn them as a group. As I said, a lot with animal names and foods, you don't need to so much learn them individually. They will come as groups. And also when you look at things like countries and stuff, a lot of the characters that make up these, they don't really have a meaning per se, or they do have a meaning but it's rarely used. And what these ones are being used more for is like phonetic sounds alone. So a good way to see which characters are used as primarily phonetic sounds by themselves within foreign words is to look at country names, specifically countries outside of Asia, because usually what they've done is they've just phonetically written out the country's name within the language, and you'll notice that, for example, Austria and Australia, they both use the same phonetic characters for the most part. For example, here is the word for Austria. You'll notice the first character, take a good look at it, and here's the word for Australia. Again, look at that first character. So there's a whole subset of characters which are used pretty much primarily for phonetic translation of names and stuff like that. Okay, so we're at the end of this video. If you guys want to know more about this, I can go into depth with certain aspects of it, but just remember, at the end of the day, this is going to be a massive grind. There is no simple method, and I do want to talk one tiny bit about people who decide to create entire stories about characters. It is best to learn the radicals and then kind of learn them as a group, as opposed to trying to create a story. I've seen lots of videos where they're like, oh, all you got to do is like create an image around what you're visually seeing. What will happen is after you get to like 1,000 characters, pretty much every image you've created in your head's going to be like a guy with a sword chopping up something, or a house that's on fire or something like that. And it's going to actually have no relation to the real character itself. So learn the radicals, learn the most common pictographic characters, then maybe learn some of the phonetic ones, and then just kind of learn the others as you go, kind of looking up what the phonetic component is and what the radical component is, and you'll kind of notice that certain phonetic components usually take like a variation of sounds, and that's based on changes that have happened to the language over 1,000 years or so, but you'll kind of get the flow, and you'll start to be able to eventually start guessing characters. Like, I can actually probably guess my way through more Chinese text when I'm reading than I actually understand in spoken form, just due to the fact that I can now kind of guess what the sound is, and then also what the meaning is, although I won't be able to guess the tones. Tones are just, sorry, you're going to have to learn those. Although sometimes the tones will usually be like one of 3 variants. Anyway, I've gone on for way too long. I'll see you all in the next video. I'm out to have some fun in China, and I hope you guys keep your grinding on, and if you don't, well, you might find a character that symbolizes your death.